for me, realizing that I had this combination of design background and being wired like a designer, but also having this training in ethnography and psychology, and the ways that those were basically helping me to reach out and understand other people's realities and try and get almost an empathic kind of sense for what someone else's world was like. That those two things together were actually a pretty rare and valuable combination. Basically being able to step into somebody else's world, figure out what needed to change, synthesize that understanding of the change in kind of actionable ways that can be carried forward. I started as a software designer out of Stanford and worked in the Valley during the first .com craze, and discovered that the part of the process I enjoyed the most was that part where you're learning about other people and trying to understand the heart of the problem. So I studied psychology, but when you're learning to be a psychologist or a therapist, you end up being given all these really poor clients that can't afford someone who actually knows what they're doing. And so then you end up seeing these massive social forces affecting people that get sent into your office because they're, having trouble, but really I worked with a lot of kids in particular, and often it was because they, didn't get a meal at home, or their parents had 3 jobs and were migrants and were afraid of raising too much attention and getting booted out of the country. These broad systemic issues that were affecting people that psychology had nothing to do with led me to want to understand how larger communities and societies worked. So it's kind of just like a weird road of curiosity, just trying to understand the world and figure out where you could make little interventions to try and change things. Social software in particular is something that is really interesting as a designer, because when it works right, it enables social behaviors that weren't even on the radar of people before it began. And that creates an interesting challenge for a designer, because generally you want to go out, see what needs to happen, create something to solve a problem, stick it out and see if it solves the problem. When you think about something like social software, though, the tools change the community that's using them, which in turn change the expectations for the tools, which in turn change the community. There's this reciprocating phenomenon that happens, and that's just a wild thing to be a part of. You end up thinking of design as an ongoing process, and the tools that you're developing as an ongoing conversation almost with the community that they're meant to support, as opposed to an artifact that you drop into a system and then expect it to sort of meet an existing latent need. When I was at IDEO, I first got there and was doing design work for clients like everyone else, but I happened to get onto this project that went inside and looked at IDEO's 500 designers spread out all over the world and tried to understand where IDEO's own internal tools were lacking. We started this project to try and take some of the best stuff that we were seeing from the outside and bring them in. And it was pretty powerful in terms of the effects that it had. Something like 20,000 internal wiki pages created in the first 18 months of our project. And again, this is 500 people. Pretty remarkable things. There's this sense in which if you provide tools, people begin to be hungry for things they couldn't have even imagined before. And so, at least at IDEO, we tried to push a new build of our tube every week to basically listen to the community, see what was working, what wasn't, and what people were asking for that they hadn't been asking for before, and really treat the software as actually an ongoing communication and service, iterating new features all the time to try and basically respond in an ongoing way to what the community was learning or emerging to need. Need to be integrated into existing IT systems, and that means that unlike other pieces of so take something like project management. It's really easy for a small team to go out and grab a 37 Signals product, or if you want to do some evaluation stuff for a team and you want to skip all the IT infrastructure, you can go download something like Ripple, or just sign up. You don't even download; it's all web-based, and that works fine. When you're talking about doing something like getting an entire organization up and running, so that everybody in the company has a profile and everybody knows how to find each other, and some of the basic fundamentals of the company's information are hooked in together, you got to work fairly deeply into existing IT infrastructure. There's legacy data support, there's communicating with the company's authentication servers, and so that means that you're limited by the enterprise choices that are available. And while I'd say that landscape is more exciting than it was when we began in 2007, there's still tremendous opportunity for enterprise tools to catch up with the things that we use in the external world. This project we got to run at IDEO was that we had a CFO who was not only permissive, but very encouraging and protective of the project. We had to do a lot of things that flew in the face of the existing IT status quo, and we could have very easily been shut down many times, not to mention just run out of budget and funds to do it. It takes leadership that shares a vision of what these tools could do in terms of collaboration and transparency of information and just access to knowledge in order to really work. And it wasn't just the CFO, the CEO as well really believed that good tools that enabled IDEO to be more agile, more limber, more collaborative were essential to its success going forward. That it was basically like building a rich nerve center inside the organization. That would really be one of the things that carried the company forward into the coming decade. It's just really hard to find a way to objectively measure how much value comes from more connections, richer access to information, what inspirations resulted that wouldn't otherwise exist, and the value of those inspirations, insights that teams get from prior work that allow them to build forward that they wouldn't have otherwise had. You have no metric against which to see how much further they went because of the tools. And you can do things like measure how many emails exist before and after. And we did things like measuring the activity. There was a blogging system that was hardly ever used before we started, and now it's heavily used and that sort of thing. And there's benefit there, but in terms of like affecting a bottom line, it's certainly far easier to make a case for turning out the lights on Saturdays or something and saving on your electricity bill. This is about like pushing the company forward in terms of capability. Two suggestions. One is that there are studies that have shown the benefits of collaborative systems. To go and find one of these studies, McKinsey's probably a great place to start. You can quickly come up with a short list of things that every leader values. And you can basically say these things are made possible by these tools. So it's maybe not a measurable argument so much as a binary argument. If you build systems that enable the organization to be more collaborative, these are the sorts of results that companies tend to see. The other thing, though, is that even if you have that, there is the technology piece of developing and deploying tools, whether they're off the shelf or built custom. And then there's the cultural piece. It's like you have to have both, right? No matter how great your tools are, if you have a culture that doesn't reward their use, they're going to fall flat. If you have a culture that rewards their use but no tools, then you're going to have this massive hunger that the tools will unlock and everything will start to happen in pretty remarkable ways. For example, we had a client at IDEO who hired us after seeing our system to build a knowledge-sharing social network tool for their salespeople. Well, a bit of human factors research revealed that there was one big bonus that every salesperson was independently competing for. And under that compensation model, there was literally zero incentive for these salespeople to share their secrets. They were competing with one another. They didn't see one another as collaborators, and it didn't matter how great how fancy the people pages were and the social networking tools, and even how easy it was to share. There was no motivation. It was game over. Find a microculture within the big culture that can be used to demonstrate a different way of being. If you can take a team or a department or a group of people who are already really motivated to collaborate but are finding friction in that process, things that are getting in their way, and they can use technology and tools to lubricate what they're already trying to do instead of incentivizing collaboration where it's not happening, then that can become a sort of shining light, if you will, within the organization. And usually the benefits of those tools within that organization, within that microcosm, are so great that becomes a really powerful demonstrator to the rest of the company of how things could be. And then a good leader should hook onto that and take it forward. You end up creating a sort of skunk works of within the large organization, a subset where things are just done quite differently, and you basically use the technology to just knock out the friction in what people are already trying to do. The first one that comes to mind is basically this realization that when you're trying to build, well, we talked about our tools as knowledge sharing tools, and early on that was, it seemed like the best way to build knowledge sharing tools was to build tools for capturing knowledge, to try and take everything that's in somebody's brain and capture it in a database so other people can access it. That's a really, really hard thing to do, and it almost never works. What we instead tried to do is what we call building pointers to people. Basically recognize that people's heads are pretty much the best containers of knowledge because they come with context, they come with all the nuance and tacit knowledge that are baked around things that might otherwise be put into a database. We basically, instead of trying to capture everything that was in people's heads, we just tried to figure out who people were in terms of what they were good at, what they had experience in, what their areas of expertise were, and make those people findable, and then facilitate the ability for people to have communication and collaboration with one another. Basically, it's about networking brains. Another big piece for us was recognizing that really what we were in the business of was friction reduction. That anything that we could do to just get to smooth the processes of collaboration where people are already trying to do so was time and energy very well spent. And that there's actually this kind of tipping point that you hit. You kind of have to cross this moment where people wanted to use the systems, but they were too hard. You get to the point where it's just so easy that everybody kind of starts doing it, and then it snowballs. Because everybody's doing it, everybody does it, and you kind of cross the line and go forward. I think a corollary to that was integrating deeply into people's workflows. No matter how great your tools are, if they require people to go out of their way to use them, you're always going to have this uphill battle on your hands. So wherever possible, we always tried to integrate the tools that we were releasing into the existing workflows of users and help them migrate from where they were to where they needed to go, as a way of moving people on this path towards a newer system that was going to take them places that the old way of working couldn't. And that migration, designing that migration, is every bit as important as designing the final tool. You don't have to be the smartest, you don't have to have all the answers, you just have to be willing to go and try and iterate and listen and see what's working and what's not, and repeat until you get somewhere better.